Well, hey, my friends, I'm Kelly Deerberger. I'm here with Discipleship in the Marketplace, and I'm interviewing my friend Alex Rossie today. I'm so excited to have him in the studio. We are talking about discipleship in the marketplace, which I've already said that, but hey, I have a few questions for you.
You have a new title for the show, though. I was like, I didn't know what the title was going to be.
It came right out. It was just naturally came out. But Alex you've been in missions, you're a missionary, you're a successful entrepreneur, and then of course you are the director of operations here at Ordinary Movement. So tell me a little bit more about your experience with practicing discipleship in the marketplace, because you've been in ministry a lot. So speak to that a little bit of how have you been able to practice it in all your various outlets?
I'll tell you the one I think is the most fun.
Okay.
And then I'll work from that. The most exciting opportunity that I've had to use marketplace for discipleship was learning ads for clients, using social media ads, helping them grow, and realizing I could be using everything I'm learning about social media growth and ads to target audiences for missions. Mm-hmm. And so when I started running ads for churches locally who wanted to promote who they were, what they were doing, so people actually knew they existed, and getting people in the door, I was doing that as an agency, and I realized like, this is really cool. Like I'm using this to help missions that I believe in, right, through marketing. And then all of a sudden it was like this light click, because I was already doing ads before that for real estate. Okay. And business wise, and felt like, man, I could be doing this for things that I believe in. And that got me excited. And that led then to running ads for missionaries who were working in the Middle East. Wow. And so in countries where they could not openly talk about Jesus without risk to their teams, to the people around them, to the Muslim background believers who are high risk of actually being persecuted, then we realized like, hey, well, we can broadcast ads to the entirety of a country and give them the opportunity to learn more about Jesus to those who'd want to at a much less risk approach. Sure. And so we began to do that, and it worked really, really well. And it was a really exciting endeavor, and it's still going today. I've kind of like helped them segue into working with another group that's way more focused. They just work with these types of groups in these types of countries and running those ads, because what we found also is there were a lot of, obstacles. You get closed, there's all, you have to work around the algorithms, right, and the policies within those systems. And then that wasn't as compatible down the road with the marketing that I do for other clients. Okay. Yeah. So that's really interesting how you've kind of put that ministry, that discipleship in with marketplace ministry, right? You have put those two things together. My question for you, though, is I want you to put on your Ordinary Movement hat, because before we get too further, I want us to define our terms a little bit. Okay. What is discipleship, or what does that look like by definition for you? I see discipleship as this holistic, full circle approach to helping introduce people to Jesus. And then those people who are introduced to Jesus, helping them learn how to follow Jesus. And as they begin following Jesus, they begin to live out the practices of Jesus. And this should lead them to a place of maturity where they can then help others learn how to follow Jesus too, leading them to being not just a disciple, but a disciple maker. Okay. And so that's like that full circle, big picture idea of discipleship, which is spiritual growth. But I don't like to only say that because I think so many people leave out this high challenge invitation of multiplication, of disciple making at or even during and also at the end of the learning experience of how to follow Jesus. Okay. So that can seem, I would imagine, a little bit intimidating to people. When you use words like discipleship, that seems like I wonder if that's a little bit overwhelming for people to think through, or like, wow, it's another job. It's another big thing I have to do. Yeah. But you're with like your ad pages or the ads that you're running in other countries, sounds more simple. It doesn't sound like such a task or such an undertaking. So is discipleship simple, or is it complicated? So I like to say that discipleship is simple but hard. Okay. That's fair. And it can be as simple as you want it to be. But I think we've all noticed, like, especially if we're talking in terms of business, it's just like, if you want to see greater results, you're going to have to push through challenges, and,
Sure.
and there's going to be friction, and you're going to have to learn how to overcome the friction
Right.
to get what you want. And so I think, you know, here's my pet peeve when you think about business people, and in my own business background is I feel like you have high capacity leaders who can
Yes.
clearly lead people, you know, to a conclusion and help them overcome obstacles and help them become clients who hopefully become raving fans.
Sure.
And then you have business people who build whole entire teams around this and can think through frameworks and systems. And, you know, like there's high capacity leaders that have clearly an apostolic gifting.
Yes.
Who then seem to not have any ability or interest in using that same approach to ministry.
Right.
So I think when you think about the discipleship piece, I think if you think of this invitation as open to all and to everyone, and you don't need to have a seminary degree or a pastor title, you just got to be willing to use all the gifts and resources that Jesus has given you. And if you take that mindset and you take that invitation, you say, well, man, I'm really good at meeting people, or I'm really good at creating community, or I'm really good at leading teams. Like I think there's the minimal is just, how do I like bring Jesus into conversations
Right.
that you're having with people in your business area.
Yep.
And then but then there's that's the minimum. And I think everybody could do that.
Sure.
But then there's the strategic, how do you do it in a way that is gracious and desirable and compelling?
Yep.
But you're doing that already as a business leader anyway.
Sure.
People are already thinking about how do I up my game in marketing?
Right.
How do I make ads that don't suck? You know, how do I make my branding more beautiful and compelling and interesting? Like we're doing all that anyway with business. So then we just have to think through of man, how could I have more than just one conversation?
Right.
Or how could I help conversations go to a next conversation? And I think as business people, we like to gamify and figure out how do we double our revenue?
Right.
But we just haven't been invited to consider, how do we gamify discipleship?
Yeah, sure.
And I don't know exactly why that is, but I think it's one of the biggest missed opportunities that we have.
Yes. Yes. I wonder if it's because we compartmentalize our faith and our business and our family and our friend. Like we have all these different things that we do.
Yeah.
We haven't done a great job of integrating discipleship into all parts of our life. We think it's kind of it's a piece of us. It's not who we are, disciple makers.
I think that, and then I also think there's just there's a fear of failure, right?
Sure.
People don't start businesses because of fear of failure, but then as business leaders, the reason that you now have whatever your business is, you know, you're there because you did have to overcome some fear.
Sure.
Putting yourself out there, building a team, of making a product, whatever that is. And you felt like the risk was worth the reward. And I think there's just this really big it's either apathy or it's fear.
Sure. Yes. Yes.
So as we'll say, Christians in the business space, all Christians are called to be disciple makers.
Yep.
Whatever that reach looks like, I don't know. Doesn't really matter. It's really between you and God. Are you using the talents that God's given you for His glory to make His name known, right? So there's the idea of the parable of the talents, and Jesus is he's sharing this story, right? There's this businessman. He entrusts his business to his different stewards, and they all have different amounts of resources to invest in building the business until his return. And you ultimately see him come back and reward those different stewards, whom he left talents and resources to leverage to build the business.
Right.
And you see one who didn't do anything, and that man is rejected.
Yep.
Right. And then you see these others, and they're rewarded well for having been faithful.
Yep.
And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And this is where I think as business people, we understand that in the context of business really well. But then there's also a lot of apathy when it comes into our faith.
Yeah.
And we're at risk in the business community of Christians of just having no interest of putting our hands to work for the kingdom.
Yeah.
And as a result, though, Jesus is coming back and he's saying, what did you do for the mission I left you to make disciples?
Wow.
And I think it's actually one of my most concerning audience, like I'm concerned about the audience,
Right.
because I know they have the capacity
Yeah.
to do so much for the kingdom
Yep.
because they're doing it locally anyway,
Right.
or online.
Mhm.
Like if you know how to do sales online and marketing online, like you could be using that to do
Captive audience.
who knows
Yeah.
how much,
Yep.
once you understand, or locally.
Mm-hmm.
And so leading with that, then it's just like, man, I think the potential is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And if apathy is not the issue, then maybe it's fear.
Mm-hmm.
But you already have so many of the, like you've learned now how to leverage your skill sets,
Yeah.
your talents, your giftings,
Mm-hmm.
to connect with people,
Mm-hmm.
to where I think that if fear is the issue, figuring out why.
Mm.
And is it just because you haven't felt qualified or invited to step into ministry because
Yeah.
you felt like you had to be behind a platform,
Yeah.
be behind a podium,
Right.
or be polished, or I think those are probably the two big ones.
Yes.
And yet neither are legitimate. God didn't place those
Right.
between us and the mission
Right.
to make disciples.
Right.
I don't know if that lands where you're
Yeah.
asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Going with assuming it's a fear.
Okay.
So a fear of failure.
Yeah.
Have you experienced a time where you feel like you were trying to implement this discipleship, kind of combine the two, work, discipleship, and maybe you did fail? Maybe you did have a moment where you thought, I missed the mark on that. Or
Mm-hmm.
did it ever cost you something to implement discipleship in the workplace?
So I did try recently doing a meetup with guys that had kids, and it was just kind of like, okay, I know how to make noise. I know how to invite people to things. And so it didn't totally relate to business, but again, I was leveraging
Mm-hmm.
what I'm good at, which is connecting and networking and making noise online.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, let me try that locally and just see if I can connect with other guys in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And there just wasn't a large turnout.
Okay.
And so at the end of the day, like I put myself out there,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really want to put myself out there.
Yeah.
Not like desperate for new guys as friends that have littles.
Right.
But I also knew like, hey, by doing this, there's an opportunity to reach people that I don't know that maybe are unchurched,
Yeah.
that maybe are not familiar with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I put a lot of time and effort into trying,
Mm-hmm.
and just found that there wasn't a high amount of interest.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, like I tried,
Mhm.
and I'm going to try something else again differently.
Yeah.
So I think there's I've experienced like that's one small moment. I don't think that was like blatant rejection,
Sure.
but it was also just like, yeah, that sucked to do a
Right.
lot of work and effort and show up at these different things and just not, it didn't work.
Mm-hmm. And then do you keep showing up?
I did.
Yeah.
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 I tried, for a while until I felt like, okay, now
Right.
I'm not being wise with my time,
Right.
because clearly
Right.
this is not a strategic approach.
Right.
And so then it's like, well, all right, I communicated well that I was going to shift, pivot,
Yeah.
tried it for a season, and then I was going to try something different.
Yep. Yep. Because I think a lot of times we try things thinking like, oh, this is going to be my ministry. This is going to be my thing. This is how I reach out. We try it once. It doesn't work. And we stop. We quit completely instead of maybe putting in some time.
Yeah.
Consistency is always key in anything you do in business and ministry with people and your own habits that you create. Consistency is huge, but then, it does get to that point where you go, now I need to be wise with my time, but also it's not a failure. I mean,
Right.
the win is in the doing. The win is in the trying and making the effort, right? So it's not always about necessarily a massive result.
Yeah.
It's just, even if it's for that one person, showing up is huge.
Totally.
Yeah. Hey friends, we're going to interrupt the show just real quick to give a shout out to Ordinary Movement. Ordinary Movement is a disciple-making movement that is helping to equip churches and individuals all over the nation to start discipleship groups. Ordinary Movement is unique in that it has an online resource for you, so you can walk step by step through how to start a group, what to talk about in your group, and how to be a disciple who truly makes disciples. These high challenge, high grace environments are perfect for anyone. You don't have to have any previous experience. No matter what background you come from, no matter what profession you're in, you can be a disciple who makes disciples. Check out ordinarymovement.com for more information and to get started. Now back to the show. So for people who, I know we see in Acts, they talk about ordinary men right? They were the ones that changed the world, that had people that because of their testimony that they were drawn to God. So what would you say to people who maybe feel ordinary? They're just doing their 9 to 5. They are just doing their business. They're just in the marketplace. They're just doing their thing. They don't feel like they have that platform or that they're very skilled or charismatic. They're not an extrovert. Maybe they feel more introverted. What would you say to them? What would be your encouragement to them for discipling those around them?
I think people really need to think about goals. Like, because we're talking in the context of business people anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And do people have goals for their faith?
That's good. That's good.
Because I feel like we all, I think hopefully people recognize like their church is filled with ordinary people. And yeah, there's a couple really professional looking Christians who are leading the church, but like that's not really that's not the goal. The goal is to Ephesians 4. It talks about like your church leaders are there to equip the saints for works of ministry. And we see that God has, he has desire for us to engage in this mission and in this invitation and to use what he's given us, right? And I think it would be helpful if ordinary people who have goals for retirement, they have goals for their business, they have goals for their family, they have goals for vacations they want to do. People make goals for, they want out of their starter home and they want to get into their large colonial that has a basement so that the kids can play. And you know what I mean? And I think we just lack sometimes like dreaming and goal setting around faith. Yeah. And I think if ordinary people would make more ordinary goals of like, hey, I want to lead people to Jesus, or I want to lead a group every now and then, or I want to know that I've tried. What am I trying at? Well, what are things I'm going to try at? Like, I think if there was just a little bit more freedom and invitation just to try goal setting or some areas that you feel like would be of high value, high impact, and you're going to have to put yourself out there. Right. Things that are approachable, like how often do you have conversations with people about Jesus at work? And by the way, I didn't mention earlier, like as a realtor, like I do get to talk to people about faith every now and then. Yeah. I've just found that like that doesn't often translate into a next conversation of like, hey, come to my house for dinner. Right. And my pet peeve with realtors who say that that's their ministry. Yes. Is I don't see them hardly ever really inviting people into the next conversations about faith or over for dinner or to my church. Right. It's just that like they had a really good, blessed conversation with somebody. Right. And maybe Jesus came up and so it's like, I think there's just more. It's that like, how do you help people really like be more intentional and more strategic in the discipleship initiative? So there needs to be a follow-up. You're saying there needs to be a follow-up. It's not just about having the great conversation, the blessed conversation. It's not just praying for somebody once. You're saying it's more you're going on a journey with them, or there's an invite to come back. There is more to it. There's a next step than just the one. There's intentionality. But I think again, if people have some goals in mind of like I want to have led people to Jesus. Well, how am I going to do that? Or I want to have helped people learn how to follow Jesus. And how are you going to do that? Right. Maybe groups are the right fit, right? If you want to say like, man, I want to do better at helping people become disciple makers, right? Not just holy huddles, right? Then you start thinking about like, how am I going to do that? Yeah. I think thinking through and feeling free to like set faith oriented goals around mission, right, would be really helpful. Yeah. That's really good. That's not something I've necessarily even considered either. Like at the beginning of the year, we always have our fitness goals, we have our financial goals, and sometimes just to grow spiritually, but also having that outward focus of what are my goals to be on mission as a person, as a family? What are my goals to be a disciple maker? I think that's definitely something to consider and to be thinking about. I think so like we do that with business though. Absolutely. Like I want to have this income, or I want to be able to provide this for my family. I do that. Yeah. And there it's like, okay, then I need more clients. I need maybe more marketing clients, or I need, a few more sales a year in order to be able to provide this lifestyle for my family. And so again, if all of a sudden we have a little bit of that in our faith area, then when there's way more intentionality of like, man, I need to not just have cool conversations and hope Jesus comes up, but like, how am I helping those people take next steps in their faith?
Yes. Who would you say, Alex, who does someone need to be in order to be a disciple maker or a disciple who makes disciples? Like, what are some attributes that you have in order to do that well?
Well, if you are a Christian, you are a disciple.
Mm-hmm.
But we have Christians who look more like fans.
Wow.
And you can't really be a Christian. Like at the end of the day, like we're called to be disciples, not Christians.
Yes.
It's probably better to reorient it and put it that way. Right. And so like, it's not who, what do they need to look like? It's that, are they owning their sonship, their daughtership, their identity, their invitation, their calling? Because we all are. Like if you're following Jesus, if you've given your life to Jesus, you're not just a Christian, you are a disciple.
Yes.
That's what we're called to be. So that's everyone. And then all disciples are called to make disciples, because Matthew 28, like that invitation is for all. Like if you're going to follow Jesus, then you're also going to not just, attend church.
Right.
You're not just going to learn.
Right.
Like you're going to engage in this mission that he gave to the church, because we are the church. So I think it's everyone, and what are the attributes? It's like, well, I think the attributes get into like, how do you go from being nominal church goer to being intentional and effective? Yes. Maybe that's the question.
Yes.
And I think if you, and that's like, you go from like low impact to high impact. Okay. When you get into like the high impact area, I do think you're going to need endurance.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna fail at like that faith conversation totally flopped.
Yep.
Or you felt like a fool, or you tried to lead a group, you told everybody to lead in a group. Nobody said yes.
Right.
Or
we've all been there.
Yeah. Or like,
all been there.
Totally. But then people just stop.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And again, it's like, imagine if people, because imagine if people stopped with their own business stuff after the first time.
Right. They
wouldn't have a business.
You wouldn't do that.
They wouldn't,
right.
You know what I mean? Like, and so like, we have to learn from failure.
Yes.
And endurance allows us to say like, all right, I'm not going to do that again. What can I try differently?
Right.
To do a group differently, or like, man, I had this whole group together. There were, 4 or 6 people that said yes. It started strong, and it waned off. And I mean, again, so there's all these things. So I just think like, if you go from like low impact to high impact, I think the attributes are going to be around like resilience. It's going to be around like, saying, hey, let me be a lifelong learner.
Yes.
And not just be stuck in my own ways or my own mindset, or because I like doing group this way, you're not going to shift and do. I mean, if you think about like low impact versus high impact, I was a small groups pastor, and I saw that a lot of small groups were really low impact.
Okay.
Because of the thinking around small groups.
Okay.
It's just very like, every semester, the same group of people do a new Bible study, and it's the same person that everybody thinks should be the leader.
Yep.
And that leader doesn't raise up any new leaders because they like to do all the leading.
Right. Right.
And they're really good at it.
It's a gift. Sure.
And so, you know what I mean? Like, so if you though say like, hey, I want to be a lifelong learner, and I want to continue to look and see, how do I do things better? And especially if our goals are oriented towards the disciple making shift, not just discipleship. I think then that leader begins to say like, man, how do I do a better job at helping people do what I do?
Yeah.
How do I work myself out of a job? How do I coach people to lead better? How do I ask better questions so that I'm not just doing all of the talking?
Yes.
How do I ask better questions so that, it allows people to learn through discovery, not just by giving them the information? So I think those are, just a few thoughts that come to mind of like, how do you shift from low impact to high impact? But we're all called to impact.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. And I think it does take a shifting in your mindset of like going back to that failure. Failure isn't fatal, and failure is just a teacher. That's just information, right? That shows us what can I do differently, or how can I maybe make a shift to do things differently next time. You know, it's just information.
I mean, when you think about like the goal is not success. So Jesus isn't looking down to say like, how many disciples did you make?
Wow.
And he's not
That's
like,
good.
you know, it's so like in the business world, we're all like,
that's what we're thinking
like,
about.
Hey,
Right.
how many, you know,
Clients.
are you, you know, 6-figure, 7-figure, you know, how big is your team?
Right.
All these, you know, things that we do to kind of like judge and analyze and
Customers. Yep.
you know, but Jesus isn't looking to say like, hey, how big is your church?
Right.
Or how many groups have you led? Or like, he's really looking to see like how many, you know, how faithful have you been? And this faithfulness has much more to do with obedience than it does success rate. So that's where the concern is if people try and fail and give up and stop and then just go back to following and attending,
right?
Well, then they're no longer being obedient. And we as high capacity leaders, like we could do that with our faith area and still feel like we're really successful in business. And hey, we're really generous with what we make in business.
Right.
But maybe we're not being obedient anymore.
Wow.
With what he's given us to do mission with.
Right. Right. Yeah, because the go and make disciples, it's not like go and make a disciple or go and make disciple, you know, that's one time. It's a constant moving
our lifestyle.
part. Yeah, it's a lifestyle.
Part of following Jesus is to engage in it.
Yes.
Yeah, even if you're not successful at it. But that's then where I think you go from like low impact to high impact is like, if I'm not being successful at it, what can I try differently?
Right.
What should I no longer do that I was doing? What leadership practice should I try adopting and implementing?
Wow, that's so good. Well, any closing thoughts for us today, Alex?
Oh man,
it's such a big topic, so much you could say.
No, it's good, but I look forward to seeing what other leaders you bring into that have been in the business space, that have been using what they've learned and their leadership acumen. And I mean, there's so many high capacity leaders though that I think hopefully are listening to this. Yeah. And my hope would be that they feel inspired and invited to take everything they've learned in business, you know, being shrewd as a snake and gentle as a dove, and saying, man, how do I, in a, you know, fun, competitive, gamified, like, how do I take everything that I've learned how to do and do it for the kingdom? Yeah. And I think, man, if we can like create that invitation and people feel inspired to try, even if they fail, it doesn't matter because it's just more important that they're trying. It could be really fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Way more fun than just attending.
Yeah, absolutely. Get in the game.
Yeah.
Get in the game.
Yeah. And show us what didn't work. I'd rather laugh with people about like, what they tried and it failed.
Yes.
Than to, you know, so.
And oh my goodness, I wanted to wrap it up, but I think you're onto something there though, because it is important that we're honest about the trial and error, right? You know, a lot of people don't want to go into those types of stories. So I think that's really important. The authenticity, being authentic.
Authenticity.
Yeah. Being authentic in what worked and what didn't. I think that is really important. And the more we can share those stories, the more it helps other people be brave and it gives them the courage to launch out and try their thing as well. So
totally.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, Alex is the director of operations here at Ordinary Movement. So go get your discipleship journey started at ordinarymovement.com. We'll see you next time for the next great conversation.